second. Let me just exit this one.
Cool. So I feel like I should make a disclaimer. I realize I see other people making these disclaimers, and I should say that this is not financial advice. Cryptocurrencies are extremely volatile. You can lose all of your money. I hold some ZClassic and Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and I also can't talk about any exchanges which may or may not support any coins. So basically, yeah, we can get started here. And let's see, this is me. And okay, so Bitcoin private. Privacy is our mission. We're open source. We have some wallets and mining pools and miners and websites. And I basically sort of floated the idea to the ZClassic community around December 14th, so about 2 months ago. And we have about 30 active developers so far. How long
does it take you to get 30 developers?
Usually 6 weeks or something. So hopefully, this is why we're here, is because we need developers, so this is exciting. We use GitHub, and we have a lot of pull requests, so there's a lot of different pieces. We have the full node software, we have a light wallet, we have our website. So if you're good at, there are people that tweet me all the time that say, I found a typo in your website, and I say, great, thank you, please make a pull request, because everything is open source like that and run through GitHub, right? So recently, let's see, some achievements we made. We shipped a Electrum-based light wallet, and it's doing transparent and shielded to transparent transactions. We have a full node Swing wallet, and the Swing wallet supports all types of transactions. And then we also recently have a mobile wallet with Konami. And so coming up next, we're going to add shielded transactions to Electrum, hopefully integrate some group messaging in the Swing wallet. There's some people working on a one-click miner. And then, of course, we have the snapshot coming up in a week. So there's going to be we had one very successful test rehearsal for the snapshot, and we're going to be running a second test rehearsal shortly. And then in the test rehearsal, we'll have partial support for SegWit coins, which, anyway, that's interesting. But basically, all Bitcoin coins will, those unspent coins will be added to the Bitcoin private snapshot. And then the snapshot happens on February 28th. And then, the way that the snapshot works is that miners are actually going to add new coins. Just like miners add new coins every block now, there's a block reward where it's actually called a Coinbase input. Some people confuse Coinbase, the company, with there's actually, before that in Bitcoin, there was a thing called a Coinbase, and those are the new coins that get created. And so the way that the Bitcoin private fork will happen is on top of the ZClassic blockchain, there will just be these special fork blocks where miners will be adding thousands of new Coinbase inputs per block. And those new coins will go to everybody that held a Bitcoin. And so basically the idea for Bitcoin private, kind of the mission, is that it's supposed to be peer-to-peer electronic cash that is fast with low fees and also has privacy. It's what many people maybe thought Bitcoin was in the early days. Being fast and having low fees, that is, I think, pretty important for developers. When I started working on Bitcoin, it cost maybe 5 cents to send a Bitcoin transaction. A lot of people were building exchanges and services, tip services and things based on that model. And now it changed from 5 cents to $5 sometimes. And so it kind of upended a lot of business models. And privacy. So, it was clear to me when I looked at what Bitcoin was that there really wasn't very good privacy and it almost seemed by design. And I was surprised at people sort of assuming that there was really much privacy in Bitcoin because you have this public ledger that's staying around forever. And you have to think that in the future, people will probably get really good at analysis techniques to be able to track and trace, transactions. And if people have machine learning in 20 years, there's a good chance they're gonna be able to trace those transactions, right? A lot of people in the community, we have people in the community who are actually very, the privacy is a personal freedom that they they fight for, and they feel like that's part of their own identity. Personally, privacy was never really a big part of my own personal identity. I just know that privacy is something that is a good utility to have for any kind of money and to run any kind of business or financial service. So if you're running a business, you probably all the employees probably don't know what everyone else is getting paid, right? And for the whole history of money, it was probably pretty normal for people to expect financial privacy with their financial transactions. And only maybe in the past 20 years, I think has that sort of seemed like maybe it's not something that should just be by default the case. And of course, we have this amazing community that just kind of blew up and grew out of the ZClassic community. And so we just had an event in New York last week. I think this is actually from Austin 2 weeks ago. So we're already doing events all around the country, and lots of people are showing up and flying into them and participating. And so I mean, we're pulling a bunch of things that I think Zcash actually made a lot of great choices. Zcash innovated on top of Bitcoin, and they added privacy. They also made a few other choices where they tried to democratize mining a little bit by using an ecohash mining algorithm. And so that's what we use in ZClassic and what we're going to use in Bitcoin Private. I've actually, as sort of a personal story, I've actually met somebody from Iran told me that he and all his friends mine ZClassic. And I was really surprised to find out. He told me, he's like, oh, wow, you made ZClassic. I mine that. And, my first question was like, well, why don't you mine ZClassic? Why don't you mine Bitcoin? And he said that they can't import the Chinese mining hardware, right? So they have a lot of low-cost electricity, but they have to use general-purpose GPUs. And then I said, well, why don't you mine Zcash? And he said, well, we don't want to pay this 20%, tax, right, to this American corporation. And so, and then, and he was saying that they actually had this period they lived through where all of their money was confiscated. And so when he teaches his friends that you can actually hold your money on a private key that you control and no one can take that away, it's a really powerful idea to him and his friends and other people all around the world. Oh, wait, I messed this up. All right, go back here. And then sort of the last sort of take on, where sort of in the future, what I think will be exciting for Bitcoin Private is trading pairs. So right now we have this case where lots of people, when they are, I think there's going to be a future where there's thousands or millions of tokens. Some of them will be representing derivatives. We're going to have this Petro token thing in Venezuela coming up, and there's going to be the crypto ruble, and there's going to be all kinds of other tokens. And, right now you have to, if you're sending your money in Ethereum or Bitcoin to an exchange, that's public. And I think there are actually cases where people are able to observe with large Bitcoin wallets that people are, when they deposit that Bitcoin from a particular wallet into an exchange, they may be buying some altcoin XYZ, right? And so that gives everybody the opportunity to front run those people. And so privacy, I think, makes a lot of sense as something you would want in a trading pair. And so now we'll get into some of the sort of a little bit more technical pieces. We talked a little about block time, block size, the proof of work, the block headers, the transactions, shielded transactions, and difficulty adjustments. So Bitcoin private has 2.5 minute block times on average, and each block is about is 2 megabytes. And so so you get it's funny, it's kind of spread out, but you get 8 megabytes every 10 minutes, right? So and then we have, with Bitcoin, there's the SHA-256 proof of work algorithm you're all probably familiar with. And then that was kind of a, that was a choice that Satoshi made, but we all know that you can build application-specific integrated circuits that are way more efficient at solving that problem. And because EquaHash is a little bit more memory hard, and it makes it more difficult to write those types of, or build those types of chips to get the same type of advantage. And so we have sort of more block throughput with ZClassic and Bitcoin private, but the headers are actually a little bit different. So they take a little bit more space. So even though we have 8 times the block size, it works out to be probably about 5 times the throughput in transactions. So one of the differences here is just if you look at the block header, we have the biggest part is this big EquaHash solution. And that's related to the different the EquaHash proof of work that ZClassic and Bitcoin private use. And if we look at the basic transactions here, this is kind of the difference between the transactions. So at the top part, you have the components of a basic Bitcoin transaction, and what you basically have is the inputs, right, and the outputs. There's a version number. The version can actually only either be 1 or 2 so far. And and then with Bitcoin private, you actually have these joint split components, and that's basically where that's how the shielded transactions happen when inputs or outputs are sent into a joint split. So the way that you can think about it is in Bitcoin private, you can have transparent transactions, right, where you see everything, and then you can have transparent to shielded. And in that case, what you will actually see is the amount that goes into the shielded transaction, right? And then once you have shielded your coins, you can send shielded to shielded, and now the amounts and the sender it's all private. But when you go back from shielded to transparent, then you will see the amount that comes out of that, right? And so this is what shielded transactions look like. And so it's just sort of going from the bottom up. At the bottom, we have the ciphertext that actually contains the shielded transaction. You have the zero knowledge proof, and then you have these nullifiers and commitments, and those are basically used to validate that the person that controlled the coins was the one that created a transaction, even though without revealing any knowledge about who that was. And then I guess the anchor kind of tells you sort of how to order those transactions. And then you have this VPub old and VPub new, and those are related to coins going in and out of the shielded transactions. So one of the most exciting things I think actually about shielded transactions is we have in the ciphertext, there's 512 bytes that can be used as an encrypted memo. So there's a lot of developers in this room, and I don't know of anyone that's taking advantage of that for some kind of application. So if you can think of some kind of application where you can use 512 bytes that are encrypted that you're sending to the receiver, and we have low fees and 2.5 minute blocks. So if you can think of something cool that you can build on that, then definitely, that's exciting. So yeah, our difficulty adjustment. I don't know why Bitcoin sticks to this every 2 weeks thing. I don't know. It doesn't really make sense to me. But Bitcoin Private uses basically has a DigiShield based adjustment to adjust the difficulty every block. So there was some crazy ping ponging happening a few months ago between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, where one would become really easy, and then a bunch of miners would shift to it, and then 2 weeks later, they would shift back from to the other one, and the other one would become really hard. And so there was like blocks happening really every 6 hours on one, and then every a lot of blocks every few minutes on the other. I think it makes a lot of sense to have much quicker difficulty adjustment. And I think this was honestly one of those things that Satoshi just kind of guessed at. If you go back and you look at the history in the Bitcoin talk discussions, he kind of just, he didn't really have a good reason to make it 2 weeks. I think it was just a guess. And now after years and years, I think, a big part of what we're trying to do here is learn from in practice. I think what we see just works well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the community. Oh wow, this is pretty quick talk here. So, I said 30, 20 plus or 30. We have a lot of social media activity, Twitter, Reddit, Discord. There's the Telegram. This is like a heat map, I guess, of like where people are coming from. And this is a graph of our Twitter engagement. So we started sometime in mid-December, and that's the Bitcoin private Twitter, and that's the growth of that. And this is the growth of our Reddit, and this is the growth of our Discord channel. And we had a thing. People just step. There's all types of people now joining the community. With skill sets that I don't have. They're marketers and all kinds of people that are writing. There's somebody made this logo. It's pretty amazing, right? Like there was just kind of a discussion like what should the logo be, and then somebody made a shirt, and I kind of messed up by not bringing all of you guys shirts, but but next time, so somebody ran a thing to get, first it started out as translations. Let's try to translate the website. I don't know exactly how many. We have a lot of translated into a lot of different languages, and then we have these ambassadors that are helping to reach people in their different countries. And then this is one thing that's pretty cool. I think is really cool. We have a Telegram and a Discord, and I think there's like 4,000 people in our Telegram, and there's a lot of noise in it. It's kind of hard to be heard. And in Discord's a little overwhelming. I don't know if you've used it. We try to split it up into different channels, so it's a little bit more organized, but you kind of have to know what you're doing. So we have this thing. We actually just have a support integrated right onto our website. So I don't even know who answers it actually. But like somebody from I don't know how it works actually. Somebody set it up, and people seem to like it. So yeah, I know it's. I mean, I honestly a lot of this stuff is just I'm not doing like most of the work for this, right? I mean, it's really amazing. I've kind of just tweeted like, hey guys, there could be a Bitcoin private. And I actually did think originally I was going to do, I thought, okay, like I could do the code to make this fork happen. But since then, there have just been like lots of people who seem like way better at it. And so they've taken over at that. But so, yeah, so what was that? Oh, okay. So give it a try, I guess. You can see who answers the thing, and so this is kind of how I see the community. We have these developers. Our mining community is amazing, and then all the other parts of our community, people doing graphics and the web and the marketing and talking to wallets and partners and all kinds of organization. That's what's really like pulling everything together. And so that's pretty much my whole talk. And then I can answer some questions or whatever. So do we want to have a way we want to do the questions, Tarek, or?
Community driven. Let the people speak.
Okay. Do we need like a microphone to get them, or?
You know, forward good.
Yes. So, yeah.
Just repeat the question.
Rob's going to help with the mic pull on. He's going to get your mic. We have another mic there. Could we go back a few slides?
Sure.
The community miner and the.
This one?
Yeah. Let me pull that for a bit. All right. We have.
Start in the front.
Yeah.
Hey there, that's interesting. So did you say it's going to fork ZClassic and then add everybody who owns a Bitcoin in addition to that?
Right. So the way that the fork is going to happen is that there's ZClassic is running right now, and there's some code that's running ZClassic, and there are miners mining it. And so people are going to write new code. And that new code, what it will do is add a specific block height. It will choose a snapshot height for Bitcoin. And then the people who are mining this new code, what their code will do is start adding thousands of new Coinbase inputs to blocks in a special window of new blocks that are mined on the Bitcoin private chain, which will basically split from ZClassic to a new blockchain, right? And so what those miners, the rules, so basically we're changing the rules, right? And you can change, that's the thing is like, you can change, like for all you developers out there, like there are a lot of ways you can change the rules for these peer-to-peer crypto networks to decide what they're doing, right? And so the rule change is basically going to say, take the UTXO set from Bitcoin and then add those as Coinbase inputs into these special blocks on ZClassic. So that's technically how it's going to work. And then that will happen for some window, and then after that window, then there will be mining will happen in the more normal way with one Coinbase input per block.
And if you own one ZClassic and one Bitcoin before the fork, you own some portion more based on each?
So if you have one ZClassic before the fork, then you'll keep your ZClassic, and so there's a question like the network may split. And ZClassic will keep running under its old rules, and then there would be two. There would be a ZClassic and a Bitcoin private. There's also a possibility. I mean, there's three possibilities. One is that all the miners might just choose that they just want to mine Bitcoin private, in which case the network won't split, but the rules will change, and all the miners will be just mining on this new set of rules, right? And then the other case is that maybe nobody will mine Bitcoin private, and then ZClassic will just keep running as it was. But assuming the network splits, if you held one ZClassic, then you have your ZClassic on that chain with those miners mining that chain. And then if it splits, you also have your Bitcoin private on this other chain. So then you have your ZClassic and you have your Bitcoin private. If you had one Bitcoin and one ZClassic, after the split, you would have your one ZClassic and your one Bitcoin still. And then you would actually have two Bitcoin privates because you have the one from the ZClassic and then the one from the Bitcoin.
And how do you claim that?
How do you claim? Well, so this is what's kind of cool is that transparent addresses in ZClassic and Zcash are actually they're the same address types as Bitcoin. So if you have a Bitcoin private key, that can also be used to control a Zcash or a ZClassic or a Bitcoin private key. So the same private key is what for your Bitcoin, you'll have a private. If you have one Bitcoin and you have a private key that controls that Bitcoin, you'll use that same private key to now control your Bitcoin private.
Because you keep the address.
Because you keep the private key. It's the same, right? It's the same address. It's encoded a slightly different way. So like Bitcoin starts their addresses with a 1, and Zcash starts with theirs with a T, right? And so and we are talking. I actually don't even. I think that the Bitcoin private ones. I think we're still actually discussing. It may start with like a BP or something like that. So the address will look a little different, but you'll use the same private key.
Just so that we know, we can have a lot of questions. So if you raise your hand, we will get you a mic so you can speak, and also give Rhett some time to catch his breath. So, who else?
Oh, so well, I guess from the slides it seemed like it's pretty much, the same protocol as say Zcash, but you're doing like a big new airdrop. Is that correct?
Right.
Is it just like it would be more correct to say.
Yeah. So that's right. So we're doing this a little bit in stages. So for those of you who don't know what ZClassic is,
Zcash.
No, well you mentioned Zcash, so I'll sort of go in. There's this sort of you kind of have to tell the backstory is there was Bitcoin, right, and then in the beginning there was Bitcoin, and then the Zero Cash Electric Coin Corporation, a U.S. corporation with investors, created Zcash. And they announced that they would have a 20% reward to pay their investors and to pay developers and things.
10%.
Okay, so it's 10% if you take that all the way out to like the year 2140, it will be 10%. But for the first 4 years, it's 20%. And so we're still in that 4-year period, right? And so I thought, okay, that seems unfair that like a few people are going to get 20% of all this money. And so I looked at the code and I was like, well, you can just delete these 22 lines of code and then we don't have to give them any of the money, right?
And white paper too. Very extensive.
Yeah, I was pressured to make a white paper about this, and my white paper's like, you just delete the 22 lines of code, right? So I tried telling people first. I was like, "You just delete the code, right?" And people were like, "No, let's just do what they say, right?" And so then I forked. I just hit the fork button on GitHub, and then I don't even think I cloned it because I just went into the editor and I deleted it right inside of the web thing in GitHub because I figured it would probably still work. And then I went on Bitcoin Talk and I said like, hey guys, you could mine this instead, right? And then people were really mad. They were like, hey, you ninja launched this, right? And I was like, you can mine this if you want to, right? And then people got mad that like some guy started mining too much, and then like other people had to mine it, and and so people were working on that. So that's ZClassic. So you're asking like, okay, so you started.
I guess I'm curious, like also about the kind of motivation, right? Like you mentioned that it seemed unfair to like allocate some portion of the coins to the people who created the protocol. But doesn't it? I mean, I'm just curious, I guess, what the motivation then is behind giving people who happen to own Bitcoin coins in this new protocol.
No, it's interesting. So the people who own. Anyway, so I kind of want to go just like real quick. What was the original question? I want to get
Well,
back.
I guess the original question is I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand: is this really just the currently deployed version of Zcash with a different initial token distribution?
Okay, so
and then the follow-up question is actually it's maybe even a more interesting question. I think people would find it more interesting. How did you settle on this particular token distribution as being, say, more fair than the Zcash token?
Okay, so I want to go. So the first thing I just want to address really quickly is now that we've explained what ZClassic is, right? So there was Zcash, and all ZClassic is just Zcash without the founder's reward, and so it's very similar. And then Bitcoin Private is basically in this first iteration, it's just going to be ZClassic with Bitcoin holders also get some of it, right? And so that seems really like, okay, well that's all it is. But we're doing a few things that I actually didn't talk about that are kind of interesting technically. The first thing is that, so because we are adding, there's going to be more coins, and we are actually going to be coming closer to the 21 million limit of total coins, right? So we're going to have a lower inflation rate than Bitcoin has now, but we also have some questions. There's actually some really interesting game theoretical questions about what happens when we get closer to the block subsidy going down. So I want to answer both of your questions. I don't want to dwell on it too much. But so what we're actually doing, because we realize that we are going to have to make some choices in the next few months with Bitcoin Private, and we want Bitcoin Private not to just be a Zcash clone plus some Bitcoin. We want to actually add improvements to it. So what we are doing is we're adding a difficulty bomb to Bitcoin Private. So we're going to force the community to hard fork upgrade to something. And this is what Ethereum does. I think Monero might do it. There's some, if Monero doesn't do that, then they definitely have it's part of the community promise that there will be hard fork to make technical upgrades. So part of the community promise for Bitcoin Private is that we, as a community, will have some hard fork upgrade, and it will happen within the next 12 months. We're adding, that's what the BIP9 support is for, is so miners will be able to signal which particular hard fork they prefer. So that's sort of that first question was, is it just Zcash? And so the answer is, like, right now, yes, it's very similar. Zcash minus the powers reward, but we know that there's also this promise of there will be more upgrades in the future, with the core mission being that we want to be, peer-to-peer electronic cash that's fast and private and with low fees. Now, how do we settle on this sort of distribution model is sort of the other question. So basically these Bitcoin forks were kind of a phenomenon a few months ago, right? We had Bitcoin Cash, and then Bitcoin Gold, and then there was a bunch of them, like Bitcoin God and Bitcoin Platinum and Bitcoin Rhodium, and Super Bitcoin was a cool one, right? And so a lot of people, myself included, I remember when there was Aurora Coin. I don't know how many people remember Aurora Coin. Yeah, Aurora Coin.
Iceland.
Okay. So yeah, it was like everyone in Iceland got an Aurora Coin or some Aurora Coin, right? And what happened was the price went up to like $200 a coin. And then everyone in Iceland was like, dude, you can just dump this thing and you get $200, right? And the price went down to 10 cents. It was like one of the earliest airdrop coins, and it seemed to demonstrate that airdrop coins were just a failure, right? And that's what a lot of people assumed Bitcoin Cash and the other Bitcoin forks would just dump, because why wouldn't all the Bitcoin holders just sell them as fast as possible, right? And so, empirically, we've kind of learned that that's not the case with Bitcoin forks, and I don't know why exactly, but there appears to be some utility to these Bitcoin forks, and I think one of the reasons is I kind of have my own sort of theory of what the heck we're doing here with crypto economics, right? And I look at the three pieces of technology I kind of put together. You have your public-private key cryptography. That's really important, right? And that was from the 70s basically. And you have your peer-to-peer networks, and then this like distributed Merkle graph data set, right? And what happens is when we already have this peer-to-peer network that's running ZClassic, and what we're able to do is include this whole network of other private key holders into our community. And so that might be the case why we grow and get more value as a community by just including these other people, right? Because if you look at like our community growth charts, I mean, I talk to people who are doing like non-crypto startups, and they like getting this kind of growth in a non-crypto startup is really hard, right? It's like $50 to get someone to download your app, right? And we didn't spend any money to get all of these people are following us on Twitter, and they're involved and engaged and everything. So I mean, that's, I think that we're still learning, and it's an experiment, and it's just kind of something that we're all trying out. So that's that question. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to
Sure.
hear, and I have a few questions. So first, just to summarize, I guess, this discussion. So basically, you're saying, like, technically, ZClassic could have achieved everything that you talked about, but Bitcoin Private adds the network effect of, like, a lot of people that would care about it because they own it, and that's the reason for Bitcoin Private. Right? Is that correct?
I mean, that's a plausible, so I don't even really know exactly why Bitcoin forks seem to be successful so far. I mean, that could be part of it. Another part of it, honestly, is that I'm just speculating. I don't know, but one thing is like, I remember when there was Bitcoin, right, and then people made altcoins, and there's Dogecoin and Litecoin, right, and they kind of sound a little bit like Bitcoin. It's like something coin, right, and that was sort of marketed in a way to the early crypto adopters. Now, it's possible that we sort of reached this second wave of early crypto adopters, but what they know is that, like, there's a Bitcoin and maybe there's a Bitcoin Cash, right? And maybe they see these things as Bitcoins. That could be that could be part of it as well. I don't know.
Okay, so another question. You mentioned ASIC consistency, and some, like when Litecoin started, they also thought that is that like a commitment from you or from the community? Because some coins have like changed their hashing algorithm when ASICs were created for their algorithms. Is that a commitment from Bitcoin Private, or is that just a nice to have for now? But if Bitcoin comes tomorrow with equihash, miner, you won't be changing that.
So yeah, I mean, it's not, it's obviously like not up to me, but I think that the general sense that I get from the community is that we like the fact that the mining has been really decentralized, and so I think that is something that the community would like to preserve. If somebody tried to build an equihash ASIC that in our upcoming hard fork, they may decide to, hey, well, let's also throw in changing the proof of work. So I wouldn't, I would suspect that would at least be seriously considered or discussed.
Okay, so last question. You mentioned low fees and fast transactions as a primary reason for this occasion. So is that a statement that you don't believe that Bitcoin Core is carrying that, right? With SegWit and Lightning, is going to solve it in a similarly viable way, or like equally good? Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
so I know several of the Lightning Network developers really well. I trust them a lot, and they say don't use Lightning Network on mainnet yet. And
Shame.
right.
Shame.
And and I can understand, I understand where people are coming from, where they see that as being, this off-chain solution that can potentially scale really well for a lot of cases. But if you look at things like Coinbase has a lot of tiny Bitcoin amounts that are actually kind of trapped because it would cost more money to move them than they're worth. And I think they have millions of dollars that are actually locked up that way. And there's no amount of SegWit or Lightning Network that can solve that, right? And so, but they will get a Bitcoin Private, and they'll easily be able to move and consolidate all of those on Bitcoin Private, right? So they're definitely a lot of cases where just increasing the block size helps with scalability right now. And then, like Lightning and SegWit aren't just a magic solution to fix all the problems.
What are you gonna do with the Satoshi wallet?
Oh yeah, it's gonna stay where it is. I mean, it's funny. I floated out the idea. Did you see my tweet or something?
Yeah, I saw that tweet.
And people were getting mad. Sometimes I tweet ideas, and then people were like, "That's a terrible idea. Delete that tweet." So I had an idea that since ZClassic is kind of like the Satoshi of Bitcoin Private, then we could take And these Satoshi coins are they're kind of a liability on Bitcoin, right? Because if they ever moved, it would probably freak people out because they haven't moved in so long. So you have this like million Satoshi coins, right? But I mean, they're going to Satoshi will get his Bitcoin private.
Following your reasoning for distributing through Bitcoin, and your reasoning was sort of similar to like growth, including them. What would be your limitation? I'm curious to doing additional communities.
Right. Yeah. So some people have said like, well, why not add like Litecoin and Dogecoin? Just bring them all in, right? I think somebody should do that experiment. Honestly, like I don't know what that would do. Maybe that would be the best crypto coin ever, right? Like I don't know. One issue is actually, I mean, you know, there are a lot of promises in these communities that you're trying to. A lot of people felt like they were made a promise one way or another, right? Like one of the big promises in Bitcoin is that there aren't more than 21 million coins, right? And then this other promise that like some people feel really strongly about is like Satoshi should get his coin, he should have his coins, right? And so, if you tried to merge in like Dogecoin with Bitcoin and Litecoin, then, well, how do you stay under the 21 million limit? And then the question is like, well, do you do it by percentage? And now you get like a third of a, Bitcoin private if you're bringing in the Litecoin or whatever. And then when you start doing that kind of math, it's just too hard for a lot of people to understand. That's why like the 1-to-1-to-1, you can tell that to a crowd and generally people are like, okay, I get it. But any math that gets more complicated than that is like, it gets to be pretty hard.
One back here.
I got two quick questions. You said, when you mentioned that when people are buying altcoins, you can actually, you can use Bitcoin private because it's private, but how do you know when you're buying altcoins, because it's all going to one public interest? I mean, how do you know who's buying what?
So what I was saying is like if there's an exchange, right? Let's say like Bittrex is an exchange, and if you right now they're base pairs. They have like base pairs, so you could send them Bitcoin and you could trade that Bitcoin for an Ethereum or something, right? But if instead they had a Bitcoin private Ethereum base pair, then you could send them a private Bitcoin transaction, right? And then nobody would be able to see what that amount was or who it was from, and that you sent it to Bittrex. And then when they received the Bitcoin private, if they had a Bitcoin private Ethereum base pair, then they could have a market where you could use to trade that, right? So that's what, and I'm just saying that like hypothetically. I'm not saying that they do, but that was the
just a follow-up question. So if you're doing payments and they want verification of the amount that was sent, if you can't see how much it was, then how do you verify it?
You as the sender and the receiver, you can verify it, but it's not publicly visible to everyone.
If you use a memo, you can use the memo function.
You use the memo function? Okay.
Yeah.
You then you. You wait.
Hi, I apologize if you answered this, but I'm just not grasping one relatively simple point here.
Sure.
So if I understand that there's faster block times and more goes into blocks, and when Bitcoin had lower volume, the fees were low, and then Bitcoin's volume increased. So a measure of success created this unforeseen problem. So if that measure of success happens on this implementation, and it happens to 8x or 16x, the measure of success we see right now in Bitcoin inflating fees, is there some mechanism other than the increase in block size and frequency of blocks, or that's the only two methods?
No, that's right. So that's the only thing right now. But the basic idea is that we have, right now, so few transactions per ZClassic block than Bitcoin. There's probably, 10 to 20 transactions per block, right? Right now it supports thousands. So we have a lot of room for growth, right? But if Bitcoin had even, we'll have 5x the capacity, right? So if Bitcoin had 5x the capacity, they never would have run into that whole, mempool clogging up, at least at that time, right?
Right, but like it mitigates itself as a problem as the fees go up.
It's not an infinitely scalable solution to this problem.
So really, this has low cost fees until it succeeds, and then it, just like Bitcoin, it doesn't have low cost fees anymore.
Correct. Except that basically we're kind of in a way kicking the can down the road a little bit, right? Because we know that we have this mechanism to force a hard fork, and there are other ways that we can try to add second layer like scalability solutions to that problem. So one thing, for example, if it takes us a year or 2 years to get to that point, one advantage that we have is we can observe all of the things that Bitcoin's actually trying to do with SegWit and Lightning and those things, right? That really, they haven't actually. SegWit's made us, there's some small probably improvement rate in the block size, but yeah, there's no right. It's not an infinitely scalable solution, but it buys us a lot of time.
Makes sense. Thank you.
What's the initial block size or initial block reward going to be for Bitcoin private?
That exact number is in the white paper, but I think it's going to be half of a Bitcoin private. So right now, because ZClassic actually has the same emission schedule as Bitcoin, and ZClassic was made in November 2016, so we're like a year and a half in. So right now with ZClassic, we're actually at about 85% annual yearly inflation, which is really high, right? And that's going to drop significantly after the fork. And I actually don't know what the effects of that will be. There will be significantly less incentive for people to mine Bitcoin private after the fork. It also means that there will be significantly lower inflation rate. So that your coins will stay more scarce, right? So it will be interesting to see what happens, and we will actually be testing as a Bitcoin fork one of the lowest inflation rates I think of any Bitcoin forks, and probably the lowest, and so I think that we're gonna have to see what that does, but if it's good, I think it could be good or bad, right? I don't know. And if it's good, then that'll be great. We're all going to learn a lot, and it's going to be great. If it's bad, I think that we'll be able to adapt and come up with we'll come up with some solution. And the community, obviously, what we want is a stable blockchain that keeps operating and not having major chain reorgs and things like that.
Thanks for your presentation.
Sure.
Given sort of the fact now that there's so many compelling privacy tokens, right? I mean, Monero was another one.
Could you talk just so the audio can get it?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh yeah,
Keep talking.
Anyway, no. My question is just basically your thoughts on sort of privacy, how that evolves in the industry as a whole, because in a universe of so many more tokens, I think I'm curious to understand how you think more deeply about privacy and how in all these different cryptographic networks how privacy.
So I actually think there's an extreme shortage of privacy-oriented coins right now. You mentioned that there were a lot. I don't see that. If I look at the top 100 coins on CoinMarketCap, and I can go through them, right? But let's say Monero is one of the top ones. Monero is not a Bitcoin fork. Zcash is, right? But Monero's not. And Monero's really proud of the fact that they used a whole new code base. But there's a lot of gotchas. And software developers that have worked really hard to understand how to integrate Bitcoin there's a lot more work for them to figure out how to integrate Monero. And for instance, like that, I don't think is there a Monero mobile wallet? Is there?
They're working on it.
They're working on it.
They're working
like
on it.
there isn't a Monero mobile wallet, right? Well, there's already a ZClassic and going to be a Bitcoin private mobile wallet, right? So that's like right out the gate one advantage that we'll have over Monero. And then Zcash. Okay, well, if you want to use a U.S. corporation coin that has a 20% tax, and by the way, they trademarked the name Zcash, so you can't actually use that without violating the trademark, right? Then, go ahead and you can use that one, right? And then, actually, I think that Greg Maxwell he has a lot of great ideas. I love, the work that he's done on confidential transactions with Peterson commitments. And there's some really awesome research. I was just at Stanford at the BPACE, which all of you should have been there. Who was at BPACE? Okay, it's like the best. It's the best dev conference I think of the year that I go to. But the talk on bullet range proofs was really exciting, and there are a lot of improvements made on that, right? And those are some things that actually I'm sure Greg Maxwell wants to include those into Bitcoin. Now the question is, Bitcoin just spent, 2 years arguing over 1 megabyte versus 2 megabytes? So, if you think that they're going to get confidential transactions into Bitcoin anytime soon, I mean, I may be, right? Then you can decide if, so that's, I don't know, that's kind of where I see the landscape right now. I mean, I think that there's a lot of really cool research. There's Starks is a new kind of zero knowledge proof that's from the same researchers that made ZK Starks, and it doesn't require trusted setup. So there's all kinds of things that I think the Bitcoin private team is actually really excited to embrace anything that we can, basically, to just build a product that people like using.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm just confused about one thing.
Sure.
So if I'm just thinking about the Bitcoin airdrop that's going to happen. So when the fork happens, if I have one ZClassic, I get one Bitcoin private. If I have one Bitcoin, I get one Bitcoin private. So doesn't it make sense for me to take all of my Bitcoin and convert it into ZClassic for the fork, because ZClassic worth like 100 times less, right? And isn't that like, isn't this sort of unfair to the Bitcoin community? You're kind of like, right, like we're letting in Bitcoin people, but they get 1/100th of the amount that the ZClassic
sucks to hold Bitcoin.
Well, no, so this is, it's interesting, right? Like, so the ZClassic community is definitely rewarded in some, way in this coin. Like, I don't know, like more proportional way.
Right.
Right. In this scheme, right?
What was that number? 16% founders reward for the ZClassic community.
Z16. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's pretty right. So it's significant, and that's and that probably has a large influence on this community growth that we're seeing, right? And so, my response to that is that if you don't like that, then you should make another coin, right? And if you don't, you can use another coin. No, and I encourage everyone to do that, right? If you
do it this Sunday at our Hacking Chat.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Sure.
2 up front and then back in the back corner. You sure? All the way in the front.
Thank you. One more quick question. We were listening to the Zcash people a few weeks ago, and they were saying shielded transactions, 15% of all their transactions. Is that roughly the case in ZClassic also? And do you anticipate shielded transactions becoming more predominant or holding that sort of ratio?
I actually haven't looked at those stats. You can look on the Block Explorer of the stats. I don't know what the current stats are. I do know for a long time it was really small. I think that I think it was much smaller than that for a really long time, and I wouldn't be surprised if, well, I'm not going to make any speculations, but it's small. And so we do want as a goal to be privacy by default in the long term, right? And so there's a few ways to approach that. I mean, one way is that Zcash has a lot of promising research right now with their release coming out this year called Jub and their sapling release. And so one of the reasons why these shielded transactions are not the default is because they require about 40 seconds of CPU to generate the transaction and 4 gigabytes of RAM. So you can't really do it on a mobile wallet or hardware wallet. And so their new technique reduces that to something takes maybe 3 to 5 seconds of CPU and like 40 megabytes of RAM. And so that'll actually make it feasible to do shielded transactions on mobile wallets. And so there's a lot more, it seems a lot more reasonable to make a mobile wallet where private transactions are the default. I honestly think that you may be able to there may be other techniques as well, like just having maybe confidential transactions, adding that into Bitcoin private as well. So you can have the ZK Snark component as well as the confidential transactions, and so we have some options, and we want to work towards privacy by default. And I'm sure that's a goal of Zcash as well, probably not to speak for them, but I'm sure privacy is part of their mission as well.
Rhett, would you mind grabbing that question at the very front? He's in
Sure.
What was I don't know if you mentioned, what was the snapshot later time for Bitcoin?
Okay, yeah.
Not 20 years.
No, so the snapshot for Bitcoin and ZClassic will be on the morning of the 28th. We didn't set a exact block height yet because that kind of the target for that time will kind of vary over time. So we just want to set it at the morning of the 28th, and then as we get closer, we will announce a specific block height. And then what happens is then the miners have to actually mine the blocks, and that's a period that it'll probably take somewhere between 6 and 12 hours. But I think we put 2 days. We put 2 days on there, so. That's your Tark's making some faces.
No, you keep going. You're on the top seat. Come on.
Okay.
Sorry. Not a very technical question, but you were on the record that you supported SEBI 2X last year, so that didn't happen. So was the thought that this was a way that you could bring some of those improvements over to Bitcoin ecosystem? Or with Bitcoin Private, are you trying to improve ZClassic with some aspects of Bitcoin, or the other way around? So
yeah, so I don't remember it. So I'm going to just clarify. I don't remember specifically saying I supported SegWit 2x exactly, but I was a strong proponent of larger blocks in general. So there was this annoying political debate thing that happened that I was kind of involved with for a few years, where I was one of the few people that said, hey, I think we should have larger blocks. And part of the reason is because I think that improvement will, I don't know what you call it, larger blocks I think would make Bitcoin more usable. And that is a big part of what I like about Bitcoin Private is that I think it'll be a Bitcoin fork that developers, like hopefully all of you guys and gals, will find usable and something that you can build applications on and something that's really exciting. For me it's really frustrating to try to build on top of sometimes Bitcoin where there's just these high transaction fees or you don't know how long. So I do like larger blocks, and I've been definitely thinking that was a way for us to I don't know, it would be a good thing for Bitcoin, but but obviously this is where we're at. We all know where that sort of went.
I have a question for you. First off, thanks to everyone that organized this group. It's nice to be you guys. My question is, and no one really talks about this, but this is what's going to make you successful in the long term. Is there any I forgot what I was going to say. Mass adoption plans, because at the end of the day, it's just going to be just a coin. But what is going to make this, for instance, if we're going to go to happy hour place and build, do you see that Bitcoin Private is going to have like vendors and so on?
Well, so one of the things that is really exciting to me, right, that kind of blows my mind is the, the growth rate of Bitcoin Private from the beginning to where we are now, I believe is way faster than the original Bitcoin, right? And that's, I think that statement was true for Litecoin as well, and a lot of other altcoins. But part of the reason for that is because we're able to use all of this infrastructure and software that took many years for people to develop and experiment with and figure out which things are good and which things are bad. For example, like Electrum, right? Like that's a really user-friendly light wallet that people like to use with Bitcoin. And people probably built hundreds of light wallets that were terrible, right? And we can now just cherry pick the one code base that is actually usable and people like to use, and then we just pull that into the Bitcoin private community. So our growth rate is is just so much faster, right? But that's going to kind of run out. So after we have sort of taken all the things that are really easy, like mobile wallets and pieces of software, block explorers, and things that we get for free, then there's the question of well, where are we going, right? And I think that's kind of the big question is where are we going in this crypto economic adventure that we're all on, right? And I have my own theories, right? I'll speculate with them at the bar later if you guys want to come over. But,
is this going to be added to Ledger Nano?
There's a pull request in right now to Ledger Nano S. I think they're a little bit busy, so they haven't merged it yet. But I want there to be obviously hardware support for Bitcoin Private. Hardware wallets are great. Everyone should try them out. So.
Quick question here. So you said, hey, 20% tax from Zcash sucks. I'm going to do my own thing. ZClassic, no 20% tax. Now, Bitcoin Private has this treasury thing where you got 65,000 Bitcoin Private that are given to miners based on their hash rate on ZClassic. How does this work, and how is this not a tax on the Bitcoin Private community?
So I don't really want to answer any questions about that.
It's in your white paper.
I know it's in it might be in the that. So because there's basically there's basically incentives and things set up for Bitcoin Private that I think I wanted this talk to be about technical and developer specific things. So I don't want to sort of range into markets and price and speculation and things like that.
Okay, then the next question is, when Zcash started, they had initial parameters set, and there was a big ceremony for the initial parameters, which ensured the lock-in of the privacy and the stuff. When you forked ZClassic, what happened to those initial parameters, and did you have a ceremony?
Right. So this is it's funny. I get this question a lot, and what was amazing. This was the amazing discovery when I was actually looked at the code. What you see is that that those parameters are actually not tied into to Zcash's Genesis block specifically. So you can just use them for a new Genesis block. So ZClassic and Bitcoin Private just use the exact same trusted setup that Zcash uses.
Whoa.
You're not going to space?
So wait, we're not going to space, but no. So that was really the amazing, because I obviously didn't have the I don't know if you've heard of this trusted parameter setup, but it was this whole big ceremony, and they used to have a lot of people. They were hiding and driving around and burning computers and things, and I spent a lot of time and money on it that I didn't have to do, and then I was like, oh wait, I can just use theirs. It was just another thing. So yeah, you literally so Bitcoin Private will use the same ones that Zcash made.
So ZClassic, was it a code fork of Zcash or a chain fork? I'm unclear.
So ZClassic was only a fork of the code of Zcash. there was a new Genesis block mined for ZClassic. And so Zcash has a new Genesis block that's not the same as the Bitcoin Genesis block, and ZClassic also has a new Genesis block. And actually, I could brag. Should I brag a little bit?
Go ahead, brag.
I'm gonna brag a little bit. I talked to Zuku about when we launched the Genesis block, right? And then the Zcash launch was actually delayed because they put too many characters in like a memo string in their Genesis block. And then I was like, oh, we just hashed ours and put it in. And so anyway, so we launched on time, and they were delayed a little bit. But.
One last question before we head to the bar. One last question for one Bitcoin private. Does anybody want a question for one Bitcoin private? Oh my God, there we go.
So earlier on, you mentioned trade pairings and front running. I think the question was touched on briefly from another question asked earlier. How actually do you propose to sort of counter people front running? Is merely obfuscating the identity of people who are trading isn't going to really get you around the need for some sort of central limit order book, like you would have had in traditional exchanges?
Sure. So inside of the central order book, if you have access to the order book information, right, and know who's placing the trades, then you obviously have this asymmetric information that you could use to your advantage. But I'm just talking about like transactions in general. I was saying that like in this hypothetical case, you may be able to just notice patterns where everyone has public access to the Bitcoin blockchain, and there's probably all kinds of patterns, right, that exist on that if you know which sort of data to look at. And so I would have to assume that people have already sort of figured out ways to take financial value from people because they're able to see this set of public financial transactions happening all the time that you may want private, so that you aren't concerned with not just that possibility. So I was just talking about the public blockchain data set in general, but that there's other than that. I mean, it's just all these other things like that companies do. A lot of companies don't want the record of everyone that they do business with in some sort of transaction publicly available on the blockchain for everyone. So.
Congratulations, Rhett, on Bitcoin Private. Let's give it up for Rhett.